You're listening to What Would Jesus Tech, a podcast about Christianity and technology from people who have opinions, very strong opinions about technology, and for people who actually work with technology for a living vocationally. My name is Austin. I am the social media manager of the Gospel Coalition, and we are joined here today with the one and the only Andrew Noble, resident idolatry expert? Is that a fair thing to say? Is it fair to call you an idolatry expert? Is the term for that an idolater?
Yeah, that's not good. It's kind of like when you get a master of divinity, it's like, wait a second, are you the master of divinity?
Right.
Yeah, no, I have studied idolatry a lot in the last 6 months, 7, 8 months, 9 months. Yeah, I've read a lot of books. Like literally, my desk is surrounded by idolatry books.
Why are you studying idolatry? Like, what out of all the things that you could be spending your time studying, why idolatry?
So one way to think about it is that I am just succumbed to the pressures of Big Eva. That big evangelicalism is all caught up in the Gospel Coalition because apparently the Gospel Coalition is so large and significant in terms of an influence in the world. It's like, no, it's not. No, it's not compared to
It's
some of the
really,
other
it's really not. Like, I mean, yes,
Anyways,
like TGC's influence is definitely large, but it
it's
is
huge.
nowhere
It's
near
huge
as
for
big.
sure.
Nowhere near as big as people make it out to be
If you look at
in
the
either
top
direction.
10 Christian books that are bestsellers, none of them are TGC names.
Yeah.
Like the best selling Christian books and according to Christianity standards in the book category. Anyways, so TGC started out of a combination of Don Carson and Tim Keller, their brains, Don Carson being biblical theology, Tim Keller being more applying the gospel to all of life. And so you could argue that my PhD is focused on a biblical theology of idolatry, because, of course, a biblical theology of anything I find fascinating, and then apply it to life. And I want to think through the ethics of it. And in many ways, this stemmed out of doing the podcast for 2 years with Joel and then reading Gregory Beale's We Become What We Worship book.
Incredible book. Incredible.
And basically that book alongside Andrew Wilson at a TGC event did a nice little thing in TGC 2023. He talked about Exodus 32, the Golden Calf incident, and he made the connection between that and phones. And I'm like, I love this. I think there's so much there to connect. What we see in scripture about idols is so helpful for understanding so many things today, and it's untapped. I think there was some people interested in it when Keller wrote that book, Counterfeit Gods, like 15 years ago, but I don't hear it talked about as much. So I'm like, I want to get into it, not at a popular level for the next few years, but more at an academic level to really see what are the connections. If you study the Bible really deeply, does that help you understand modern technology in a better way?
Yeah, and just to be clear, we're not talking about media per se. Like, I think there's an undue emphasis in these kind of conversations about media, wanting to become what we worship in terms of the influencers or the celebrities or the personalities that we see like as a type of content that shapes us. But you're talking about the form of technology and what that does to us and how that connects to idolatry, which is a slightly different conversation than the ones that we're used to on this.
Yeah, exactly. That was actually my frustration with Greg Beale's excellent book, is that when he gets to the final section for application, he talks about television and I'm like, ooh, interesting. I'm excited for this. But it's not about the medium of television. He says the television is about personalities, and personalities sell you things, and it's all about you at the end of the day. So it's a focus on the self. And it's like, well, yeah, but how does the medium of the screen itself form us in certain ways, as opposed to a written or in-person physical relationship with someone? Each medium forms you in different directions. And so that's one thing that you see in idolatry is idol worship. It's not simply some other god, worshiping some other god. There's also the form of idolatry of taking some physical object and using it to worship Yahweh, the real God. Well, that is also a form of idolatry. And that question is that's the question that's being put is, do you worship God the right way through the right methods, through the right
Hmm.
means? That's actually an important question to ask. And that's what idolatry gets at.
Yeah, Neil Postman in Amusing Ourselves to Death. Neil Postman's not a Christian, but has a lot to say about Christianity's relationship to technological mediums, namely television and computers. And in Amusing Ourselves to Death, he has an amazing connection that lit my mind up the very first time I saw it. That the second commandment, that you should not make a graven image, is a prohibition that sets Judaism and by extension Christianity apart, because it makes Christianity a word based religion
Hmm.
as opposed to a visually based medium, which sets Israel apart in the context of God giving the law to Moses and the people in the wilderness. That immediately sets Israel apart from the rest of the nations, who are all visually driven religious groups.
Hmm.
Israel was to be a word driven religion. They were not supposed to carve an image of God, which of course they immediately turn around and do with a golden calf. But they were
Yeah.
supposed to hear the word of the Lord and obey the word of the Lord, not follow the image of the Lord.
Right. Exactly. And that comes out really clearly in Deuteronomy 4. On one aspect of it, in Deuteronomy 4, verse 6, obey these laws carefully, for this will show your wisdom and understanding to the nations, who will hear
Mm-hmm.
about all the decrees and say, surely this great nation is a wise and understanding people. What other nation is so great to have the gods so near to them the way the Lord our God is near to us when we pray to him? And what other nation is so great to have such righteous decrees and laws? And then like, so that's this epic thing. And then the verse right after that, after stating this is going to be unique and the other nations are going to be impressed by how unique this is, it says, be careful, watch yourselves closely, that you do not forget the things your eyes have seen, or let them fade from your heart. It's like, what did your eyes see? Well, your God stood before you at Mount Horeb, but did you see anything? No. Verse
Mm-hmm.
12, the Lord spoke to you out of the fire. You heard, this is directly from Deuteronomy 4, verse 12. You heard the sound of words, but saw no form. There was only a voice. So it's this distinction that like God does not have a body. Some people argue that God in the Old Testament actually does have a physical body when Moses sees his back. That's not just a metaphor. That's not just um,
There's so many
a
problems with
Jesus
that.
thing. It's because some one Christian response to that is that, well, you're seeing Jesus when Moses went up the mountain, um when Elijah went up the mountain,
Hmm.
they actually interacted with Jesus when he went up the mountain for the transfiguration, and time broke. And so there's some Christian ways to answer it, and I don't know how to wrap my mind around that. But then the ways of saying God has a physical body, it's like, no, 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 that's
Yeah.
Jesus took on a body as the second person of the Godhead. That's a different statement than God the Father has a physical body. So,
Right,
anyways.
right. There's a shorthand that happens whenever we say God, especially in connection to the Old Testament. We're almost exclusively referring to the person of the Father, unless specified otherwise. It doesn't always mean that in all of the Bible, but in the Old Testament, especially when you say God, you're talking about primarily the Father. But I wanted to drill in on one thing that we were talking about in the WWJT Discord, which, by the way, dear listener, we have a free Discord. You can come hang out with us and you can talk news and events and other tech related things with us. It's a great time and it's totally free. You don't have to pay anything to join. But we were talking
Mhm.
about training AI, specifically training like social media AIs like Grok and Llama, Grok being for X and Llama being for Meta. And you were reading a really old dude named Tertullian. And he had some very strong words to say for people in his day who were involved in making idols, but they themselves did not worship the idol. The crafting of the idol was just their daytime job, but they personally weren't into that. How did you stumble across this?
Well, I think it's important as Christians not just to say, I will listen to the Bible and apply it to today, but I will also look at how other Christians have read the Bible and applied it to their age. Because it's like going to another country and they might have mistakes, as C.S. Lewis says, that are different than yours, but they're not the same as yours. And so then when you go back to your own country, you gain wisdom for how to better apply the scriptures to your time. So Tertullian, church father, not writing scripture, but writing after the scriptures were written, he he has some strong words, and he kind of takes idolatry in what I'll say is the broad sense. There's different ways of thinking about idolatry. One way of thinking about idolatry is that every kind of sin is idolatry. Like
Yeah.
any, and Paul, even in the New Testament, does this a few times where he's like, greed is idolatry. The one
Hmm.
who's greedy is an idolater, according to Ephesians 5:5. Or you can look at Colossians 3:5. So you have those kinds of statements. And so Tertullian, he's really trying to rebuke people who say, I work for a king, and in the service of that king, I craft an image to be worshipped. But don't worry, I'm not participating in it myself. Tertullian's like, no, 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 no. If you're crafting something and if you're part of that process, knowing what that's about, and he does say it in one point later on that I didn't share this in the Discord, but basically he says that like the cause is important. Like that's almost a direct quote. The cause is important. The
Yeah.
reason for its existence, the purpose of doing it is important. Um, so there's different ways to think about, wait, is this an idol that I'm making, or is this just a machine? Because that's what we're going to get into. Because the connection that I want to make is that one of the things that people are saying is that these AI tools that are being made are like gods.
Yeah.
This is not just theoretical. Like
No, this is,
Christopher De
yeah.
Claro, he has written on this called "Building a God: The Ethics of Artificial Intelligence and the Race to Control It." Like this is a real book that was printed, and it's well researched, and it's well argued by a publisher to like, how should we do this thing of building a god? Because it's acknowledged that that's what we're doing. We're building a
Hmm.
god. It's a super intelligence. It's not like other machines. It's something that we will trust, and it will control us. And there's academic literature that I'm reading on this kind of stuff that even theorizes about, well, maybe we can think about God as a placeholder concept for how humanity will respond
Yeah.
when it comes to AGI, artificial general intelligence, not just specific tasks getting completed, but general tasks are able to be completed. Everybody argues over the definition of AGI. Basically, when a majority of human tasks can be accomplished better than human can by a computer, is when AGI hits, is one definition, for example.
Right.
So if you build this thing that's better than most humans, is that not some form of super intelligence or God? And the question is then, if you work at a company like Meta, or if you
Hmm.
work at a company, like we've always had these questions of, can you work at Instagram, well, knowing all the harms that it does to teens? Well, can you work
Right.
at OpenAI knowing some of the effects done? But then it gets into the question of cause, and are you actually doing something there that's for the purpose of creating a god to be worshipped, or are you trying to build it for all the other good uses that AI creates? Um,
Right. Well, and there's
it's
something to
tough.
be said, and there's something to be said too for the way that a lot of AI is being built, and we can use llama as an explicit example here. Like there in this AI arms race, there is a competitive advantage to circumvent laws and circumvent what's right and proper
Yes.
to get a more competitive product. Meta took, I don't know how they got this, but they took a couple million printed books and used that as part of Llama's training. Did not secure the copyright for that, did not secure permission to do that. They
Hmm.
just went ahead and did it. So
Hmm.
all of these authors who otherwise may not have ever consented for their works to be used to train this AI to make this AI more capable and more intelligent have now found themselves like their works are now part of this AI, and there's nothing really that can be done about it, and Meta probably will not get penalized for that in any way, shape, or form. So there's a challenge here of like whether you're actively trying to build something or not. you're still involved in the process of these things getting built somehow. Even if you're just
Mhm.
using Facebook, your content trains Llama. If you use X, your content trains Grok. Even if that's not your intention, even if that's not your purpose, that's how broad reaching this is, to where you don't have to be a skilled woodmaker or iron worker to craft a physical idol like you would have back in biblical times. All of the activity on the internet right now is going towards building these AGIs and what they're going to be used for.
Yeah, and I'll just add a quick story. So when I worked at Plum Software Company AI, helping companies hire people, B2B SaaS, um, I went out for lunch one time with my boss and met up with his buddy who was the CTO at another tech company in the region. Won't name names, but basically it was just the three of us, and he was describing this new government contract that he secured for a whole bunch of legal documents. And he was an AI company, leading an AI company. And he made the remark that you wouldn't believe it. They gave us access to 80,000 legal documents. And the look on his face, salivating, not over the food that was in front of us. It was actually pretty bad food that day, but but salivating over access to all this stuff. And my boss made a comment like, well, kind of like, why does that excite you so much? Like, you can't actually use that to train your thing because you need to keep it for just the purposes of what the government thinks they're getting into the contract with you. And he
Yeah.
made the comment, well, what they won't know won't hurt them. That he will use all of that 80,000 legal contracts of this government in order to train their model to have better legal understanding, better, like the more data you give to these AI things, the better they become. And if it's high quality data, like the New York Times or whatever, that's something we saw with OpenAI. So yeah, my big point, just to affirm what you're saying and to confirm what I've seen in people locally, is that people leading AI companies and tech companies generally, when you're on the cutting edge of something and it's a race to be first, you look to cut corners.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that means that it's really tough to be a Christian at some of these companies when you try to have a moral backbone, and that's going to make things more difficult for you. That doesn't mean you necessarily need to quit because you
Right.
don't need to participate in those actions. It just means that you need to be in the world and not of the world. And it's like, I just want to say to the people working in those spaces, it is more difficult to be a Christian where you are in that tech company than a lot of other companies. That doesn't mean you should quit. It just means that you might be doing the job that has a lot more burden and Christian responsibility. It's like if you're a doctor right now and you're dealing with patients asking for abortions and end of life.
Yeah.
And like, there's a lot of moral difficulty with that kind of profession as well. So you're not the only special profession, but you are a special profession in that it's going to be difficult.
Yeah. And there's something to be said too, that like we as tech thinkers and tech writers, like neither of us are like vocationally working on AI in any way,
No.
shape, or form. Like we're not, excuse me, we're not trying to build an AI for a company or for a use or anything like that. But what I think tech practitioners might push back on us and saying is that, we focus on AGI and kind of like the big shiny use cases for AI, like OpenAI and things at the more popular level. But there's a lot of AI work that can be done and is being done for very niche targeted purposes that will never get trained on the kind of data that we were just talking about, because it doesn't need to be trained to be useful for that end. So one of the things that we have to do here is, like, when we talk about AI, we're talking about AI at the level that most people will experience AI at. That's not all there is to AI, but the
Mhm.
vast majority of people are not going to use these very like niche in-house, like task oriented or knowledge oriented AIs for specific companies and specific organizations. Not everyone's trying to be open AI. Not everyone's trying to make a Grok. But there are a lot of companies out there making AIs for their own in-house uses, and we would say that that's a different conversation than someone who's working for maybe OpenAI or Grok. or working on llama actively trying to do whatever they can to get at the top of the pack.
Yeah, I mean, it's the nature of this beast of what is AI, and trying to differentiate in people's minds what that means, because obviously for a lot of people now, it is this chatbot functionality. That's what they think
Right.
of when they think of AI.
Gives them answers to
Rather,
their homework, helps them write their essays. Like,
yeah, so it kind of fits in this category of, yeah, with all that kind of stuff, as opposed to prediction software that's used for, various weather apps to help predict whether or not it's going to rain or not. Like, we don't even think about that kind of use of AI. We're like, well, of course that's okay if you're predicting the weather based around a bunch of data.
yeah,
And it has some machine learning built into it so that it reinforces itself to be more accurate over time in theory. So yeah, no, it's the nature of the beast. But at the end of the day, the question that I'm trying to wrestle with is, at what point is what we're building when we call it AI, whatever that is, at what point does that become an idol? At what
yeah.
point does it become, especially as, so a prediction that I think is coming, and Joel has all been predicting this over and over. He's like just waiting for it. Is the robotics element of it? Like when they strap a
Right.
chat
Yeah.
GPT functionality with voice into a Roomba, you're going to have a different kind of interaction. And you and I have been talking about Sherry Turkle's book, um,
Yeah. Alone together.
Alone Together. It's just fascinating. I've made it through the first half of the book, really long, detailed book, but it just goes through account after account of these kids and elderly in retirement homes, lonely, and so they give just a rudimentary robot.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are currently experiencing technical difficulties, but while Andrew is trying to reconnect to the internet, let me sell you on why you should become a What Would Jesus Tech Patreon. If you support this show financially, you won't hear annoying advertisements in this section where I, your lovely host, are talking to you right now. You'll get to hear the podcast that you want and only the podcast you want, and not a bunch of really crappy interjected ads by a third-party ad service. So if you value an ad-free podcast experience, you should support us on Patreon using the link in the show notes. And I think we have Andrew back on the call. So Andrew, what were you telling us about Sherry Turkle's Alone Together?
Thank you, Austin. Turkle's Alone Together. She is like a behavioral psychologist in many ways. She just wanted to see what human behavior was when put into a one-to-one interaction with a robot. And she just gives example after example, anecdote after anecdote. It's less of a survey where you're getting a quantitative data point and more qualitative research where you're saying, here's what this person is doing. They're embarrassed about how much they've grown attached. This person is hiding the robot so that they can keep it for longer.
Yeah. Yeah.
This elderly person is saying that it's not really a human, so it doesn't matter, but they kind of treat it like a pet. They literally like
Yes.
stroke its head, and ask it if it's feeling okay, even though it's a machine. And so she does an excellent job of just going after an account of human nature, prone to seek after a relationship in what does not have life. And for me, that's what idolatry is. Idolatry, our nature built into it after the fall, depraved, is that we seek after a relationship with some object that does not have life. And
Yeah.
my fear is that there will be a lot of people caught off guard with just how much, like we already see it with the internet now in terms of loneliness and people not being connected to one another as much. I only see that growing more and more with AI, because one of the things that Sherry Turkle talks about is that, like, I can confide in a machine, is what people say, and they won't reject me.
Yes.
My boyfriend, they might not respond well, but the machine will always be empathetic. My boyfriend might
Yes.
walk away from the conversation. The machine can't. I can program it to listen to me. And it
Yeah.
is this kind of, yeah, just like when the people built the golden calf, they were like Moses is taking too long is kind of the tone you get. We don't
Yep.
know where he is. That lack of
Is he even
knowledge.
alive? Is he
Yeah,
even alive? Like,
that sense of uncertainty, it's supposed to drive us back into prayer and to trust in God and to trust in the creator of all things and to know that he's providentially working all things together for good. That's where our hearts are actually made to go. But instead you can go to the quick fix, which is either golden calf making, um,
hmm
or the technological device. And so I see a lot of similarities. There's not a one-to-one. There's lots of differences. My point about the human side of AI, or the human side of idolatry and the human side of AI is very similar. We look to something for a relationship instead of in prayer, as Jesus said, quiet in your room. No physical
hmm
thing. Jesus is saying that go to your room and close the door. One of the things Jesus is pointing to is that you should not need a physical object to worship God in prayer. Uh,
Yes.
anyways,
Well, and what you're describing, though, I mean, we can already begin to see this in a lot of data about Gen AI usage right now. John Dyer tweeted out a fantastic chart that showed the differences from how Gen AI was being used even just in 2024 versus what's already being used right now. And in 2024, the number one use case for Gen AI was to generate ideas. It was to help spur thinking and help you come up with new ideas that you may not have had before. But in 2025, that went from being the highest use, the most used feature of it, to like sixth place. So it dropped down several points. What took first place now is therapy and companionship, which was already second place the year prior. So people are already gravitating towards these AI for that intimacy, for that companionship, for that friendliness that they
mhm,
are not getting in embodied real life relationships. And it's going to be hard for real life relationships to compete with this for the reasons that you said. Like the AI will never get mad at you. The AI is, the AI may misunderstand you, but you can very easily correct its misunderstanding with minimal conflict and friction. And it will always be there for you 24/7. I mean, that is, no embodied relationship could ever compete with giving you
mhm.
everything that you want in a relationship without any downsides.
Yep. And number three on that list of top 10 Gen AI use
Oh
cases
yeah.
in 2024, it wasn't on the list. It wasn't in the top 100 at least, because this is through this filtered.com list. Like they have categorized just the top 100 reasons. In 2024, it wasn't in the top 100. But in 2025, the third most common reason for using AI, finding purpose. Like
Yeah.
this is what
Like
we go to for God.
yeah, this used to be the sole defining feature of any religious system, whether Christianity or otherwise. Who am I? What am I here for? What am I supposed to do to solve the problem of my life?
Mhm.
Now we go
Yeah,
to AI for that.
yeah. And I think ultimately because AI does not have life, and give me another few years to define life in a really biblical, theologically rich and philosophically nuanced way, but whatever I understand in Deuteronomy 30 to be Moses's plea, choose life. It
Yes.
connotates something there about prosperity, something there about flourishing, and fundamentally, it's God, God
Yes.
who is life. Interesting in the New Testament when you see at the end of First John, keep yourselves from idols. People
Mm-hmm.
think it's just out of the blue. The verse before talks about how Jesus Christ is our life. There's
Correct.
always that contrast there between the lifeless idols and the life-giving God who is himself life. And so it goes back to this, like, do AIs have life? Do idols have life? And some of that gets at this idea of consciousness, as well. And some of it, like a certain sense of animation. And like, yeah, maybe there's a world in which we create a biological pig strap a GPT to it. Like, like there's
Sure.
weird cyborg realities that might make this more complicated in the future than um imagining right now. But at the end of the day, you just need to ask and say, does this have life? And one of the practical takeaways that I would give to Christians listening to this, in addition to what we've already said to like people working in tech, to encourage you that it's hard, you're doing good work. You might need to quit your job if you're engaged in sin. You might need to stay in your job to direct them toward moral good. But in addition to speaking to people working in tech, is just people more generally. Are you choosing life when you
Right.
are using technology? Are you, because that's Moses is saying, yes, choose God, but he's also trying to give a moral like redirection of, wait a second, you need to follow God's laws. And that is where life is found. They were made for your flourishing. So are you finding
Yes.
that when you use your cell phone? Is there life there? When you use your car instead of walking, is there life there? When you use your Keurig machine as opposed to a French press, is there life there? Someone is trying to convince me to go to French press,
As
and
someone
maybe
who
there
did
is more
as
life.
someone who did French press for like 7 or 8 years, I don't recommend it. Like
A lot of work.
either go AeroPress or just go pour over. Like get a Kalita, get a Chemex. Like stay away
Okay.
from the French press life, man.
Well, all decisions are informed by this decision of whether or not we're choosing life, and that's what we need to figure out, and what I'll continue to try to wrestle through.
And it's important to when we talk about this. I mean, we are very focused on one particular topic, and it is true. I think you're exactly right that there will be people who do come to worship, not in a metaphorical sense, but like in a almost demonic sense, like
Yes.
will come to worship AIs. I don't think it will be the majority of people. I don't think it's going to be the average person starts to worship AI, but we all worship something. We are all turning to something to give us that ultimate meaning and ultimate significance in life. And the question is, can that thing give you what you want it to give you?
Hmm.
If the answer to that thing that you're looking for is not God, you will be crushed. You will be on empty. You will be disappointed, and eventually you will be ruined because only God can give you the life that you're desiring to find in these other things.
Hmm. That's well said. Um, yeah, there's a verse in Deuteronomy 32, verse 17, that says they sacrifice to false gods who are not God, gods
Mm,
they have not known, gods that recently appeared, gods your ancestors did not fear. So there's this sense of like, you might get caught up in things that are new, is what
yeah.
Moses is, and these are not God. And then later on in verse 21, they made me jealous by what is no God. They angered me by their worthless idols. There's this sense of like, it's not God. Like it's you think it is, but it's not. And see now, I myself am He, says God. There is no God beside me. I put to death and I bring to life. I have
Hmm.
wounded and I will heal, and no one can deliver out of my hand. So it's at the end of the day, we're recording this around the Easter season. It'll come out after that, but that's kind of a something that should stick with you all year round. Is are you living out of the life that is in Christ and His resurrection because that's where it's offered, or out of grasping and seeking and finding it through your own means and methods, which is what idolatry really comes back to.
Yeah, that's a good closing word. Well, thank you for listening to What Would Jesus Tech? We hope that you enjoyed this episode, and we hope that you'll subscribe to get new episodes in the future. If you want to follow us, you can follow us on all the major socials. You can join our super awesome and amazing Discord server where you can come hang out with us and talk with us and swap memes and dad jokes and all sorts of other good times. It's good, wholesome, clean Christian fun, but it's also about technology. Who wouldn't want to come be a part of that? Also support us on Patreon just so we can keep the show going and keep it an ad-free experience. Patreon supporters do get some tangible perks for supporting us, so we make it worth your time to
The
support us on a
Severance
monthly basis.
episode was amazing. Like
Yes,
I'll just say it.
the Severance episode was one of I've been podcasting now for almost almost 10 years, no, longer than 10 years. I would put that Severance
Uh,
episode as being like one of the top 10 like podcast
Very fun.
experiences of the past decade. But you can
Yeah.
only get that episode if you're a Patreon supporter. So you should help us out and we'll give you something good in return.